Permafrost might be a formidable opponent, but around the world, railways must cross many different landscapes. And one that presents an altogether different challenge is a woody wilderness. In the late 1800s, fueled by the gold rush, the demand for timber across North America was sky high. Thick pine forests on the western slope of the central Sierra Nevada wilderness offered an abundant supply. Horse and oxen were the usual method of transport, but to meet demand, locomotives with their superior power began to appear. But getting them through thick forests was far from easy. Engineer Chris Potts is at the site of a once prolific logging operation.
This is the Sugar Pine Railroad, located in California's Sierra Nevada forest. And these surroundings are what would be typically seen in the early logging camps. These tracks here are actually quite modern, made of steel, sturdily fixed into place, and well-maintained. The difference is that the early railroads would have had no such luxury. Earlier railroads were made of the logs they milled. The tracks would have only ever been temporary.
Quickly laid temporary tracks would weave their way through the trees. The track's tight curves and makeshift nature were a recipe for disaster for the recently introduced rod locomotives. These huge trains were powered by pressurized steam, with their horizontally mounted pistons driving only a single set of wheels. All the power from the engine concentrated in a small area meant poor traction and a limited ability to climb gradients.
This is a rod locomotive's worst nightmare. They could only travel about 4% grades at their max, and this right here is about 12%, almost 3 times as much as a rod locomotive could usually go on. With the rough terrain, the tight curves, and the steep grades, rod locomotives would have a hard time making it here.
But it's not just the terrain that the engineers were battling with.
When the rod locomotives went down the track, the action of the piston moving back and forth would have easily tore the tracks right out of the ground. If locomotives were going to make a positive impact on the logging industry, the rod engine would have to be completely rethought.
And in 1877, entrepreneurial logger cum inventor Ephraim Shea proposed a solution with the introduction of his radically redesigned locomotive.
This is incredible! I'm riding the number 10 Shea, the largest narrow gauge Shea ever built. Standing up here, you can truly appreciate the power. The steam, the heat of the fire, and the pistons moving up and down. What a feat of engineering. Absolutely incredible.
This is a Shea Lima locomotive, and it's impressive beyond its mighty power.
At first glance, you'd be forgiven for confusing the Shea with a rod locomotive, but actually it was a revolution in design. It completely transformed the locomotives for the logging industry. Wilderness like this would stop any rod train in its tracks, but not the Shea.
The key to Shea's design is that instead of using rods to power just one set of wheels, it uses gears to share the power between 6 sets of wheels. It's a fundamental change that transforms how a locomotive uses its power and gives the Shea its unique appearance.
What a monster of engineering. This is how it works. There are 3 giant pistons, and these massive pistons work in a vertical direction. As the power generated by the steam from that boiler is transferred into this gear train. It is sent down to the bevel gears, and these gears work with a 2-to-1 ratio, where the smaller gear spins twice as fast as the larger gear. And the way it works is it takes that speed from the smaller gear and transforms it into torque, meaning that this train can go up 14% grades, unheard of for trains of its age, and can take huge loads across huge distances. There's a bevel gear on each one of these wheels, essentially making it a 12-wheel drive. Pretty cool.
By realigning the cylinders and gearing the power to each set of wheels, the Shay also had increased traction and would be far better suited to the demands of the challenging logging landscape.
So one of the key differences here is that this train operates with 3 vertical pistons, meaning that it was a lot less destructive than the rod locomotives of its time, where they operated with a horizontal piston, meaning that it was less destructive to the tracks.
After its introduction in 1878, the Shay locomotive was an instant success story, enabling these relatively small engines to move heavy goods at low speeds over rough terrain. Over the next 10 years, more than 300 Shays were produced, totally transforming the logging industry.
The Shay train was perfectly equipped to brave even the most challenging of wilderness. This is an incredible feat of engineering. Just the sheer power. I love it.